Harlem never truly slept in 1948. Even at 3:30 in the morning, the streets breathed. Low murmurs from after-hours bars, the distant rumble of an elevated train, footsteps echoing off brick walls slick with years of rain and smoke. This was the hour when men disappeared and stories were born. Bumpy Johnson knew that. He had ruled these streets long enough to understand their language. That night, he wasn't hunting trouble. He was simply moving through Harlem the way a king moves through his kingdom, alert, respected, and always listening. Then he heard it. At first, it was easy to mistake for a drunk choking on cheap liquor. Harlem had plenty of those at this hour. But this sound carried panic, short, broken gasps, like someone fighting an invisible hand wrapped around their throat. Bumpy slowed his steps. His instincts, honed by decades of violence, told him this wasn't something to ignore. The sound came again, weaker this time, dragging out of a narrow alley where the streetlight barely reached. Most men would have kept walking. Alleys at 3:30 a.m. were where ambushes happened, where bodies were found the next morning, where enemies waited. Bumpy stepped closer anyway. The alley smelled of damp concrete, garbage, and fear. As his eyes adjusted, he saw a small shape on the ground, twisting, clawing at the air. Not a man, a boy, no older than 15. Blood darkened his shirt, spreading across the pavement like ink. The boy's face was pale, lips trembling, eyes wide with the terror that only comes when death is close and unavoidable. Bumpy knelt, scanning the shadows first, his hand ready. This could still be a setup. Harlem never handed out innocence for free. Then the boy turned his head slightly, and the streetlight caught his face. Bumpy felt his chest tighten. He knew that face. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same sharp nose, the same brow, the same eyes he had seen across poker tables and through clouds of cigar smoke. This wasn't just any kid bleeding out in an alley. This was David Mitchell, Sonny Mitchell's son. Sonny Mitchell, the man who had tried to kill Bumpy Johnson 6 times in 2 years. 6 attempts, 6 moments where Bumpy had come within inches of a bullet, a blade, or a bomb meant to erase him from Harlem forever. The alley went silent except for the boy's fading breath. Memories hit him all at once. The first attempt, a shooter waiting outside a club, nervous hands shaking, missing by inches. The second, a car meant to explode, disarmed just in time. The third and fourth, paid men who talked too much and died too fast. The fifth, a knife meant for Bumpy's back in a crowded room. The sixth, the closest call of all, when death had felt personal. Sonny Mitchell wasn't reckless, he was determined, and he had failed every time. Now Sonny's son was dying at Bumpy's feet. This was the moment men talked about but never faced. The kind of moment that didn't come with witnesses or second chances. Bumpy didn't need to pull a trigger. He didn't need to give an order. All he had to do was stand up and walk away. Harlem would swallow the rest. By morning, people would whisper about how Sonny Mitchell's boy died in an alley, and no one would ask questions. In the gangster world, this wasn't murder. It was fate settling a score. Bumpy looked down at the boy again. David's hands twitched weakly, fingers stained with his own blood. He wasn't begging. He couldn't. His body was already giving up. This wasn't Sonny Mitchell, the enemy. This was a kid who had no part in the war that surrounded him, a kid who probably never understood why his father lived looking over his shoulder. 10 seconds. That's all Bumpy had before the boy's breathing slowed to nothing. In those 10 seconds, Harlem waited. Bumpy's reputation had been built on fear, intelligence, and absolute control. He was known as a man who never forgot a debt and never forgave a betrayal. Walking away would have made sense. It would have ended the Mitchell problem forever. No more attempts, no more threats, no more unfinished business. The streets would understand, they always did. But as Bumpy watched the boy struggle, something shifted. Not weakness, not hesitation, something deeper. A line he had drawn long ago without ever saying it out loud. He had crossed many boundaries in his life, but killing a child, even by neglect, was one line he refused to erase. The alley wasn't just an alley anymore. It was a test. And in that moment, before Harlem could claim another body, Bumpy Johnson made his choice. Sonny Mitchell wasn't a rival you bumped into by accident. He was deliberate, patient, and consumed by one thing, ending Bumpy Johnson. In Harlem, most conflicts burned hot and fast. Arguments started in bars, bullets flew, and within weeks someone was dead or forgotten. What made Sonny different was persistence. He didn't want to hurt Bumpy, he wanted to erase him. And over the span of 2 years, he tried to do exactly that 6 separate times. The first attempt was almost casual, like Sonny was testing the waters. A hired gun waited outside a club Bumpy frequented, tucked into a doorway, nerves rattling louder than the traffic. The man fired too soon. The shot went wide. Bumpy didn't even flinch. He simply turned, eyes locking onto the shooter, and the street swallowed the rest. In Harlem, failure was rarely forgiven. Sonny learned that lesson early, but he didn't stop. The second attempt was smarter. A car wired to explode, parked where Bumpy liked to sit and talk late into the night. It would have been clean, quiet, final. But someone talked, someone always did, and the device was found before it could do its job. Bumpy understood then that this wasn't coincidence, this wasn't business, this was personal. Sonny Mitchell was escalating, and he wasn't going away. By the third and fourth attempts, Sonny was spending real money, professional money, men who knew how to blend into crowds, how to wait without being seen, how to pull a blade in a packed room and vanish. One tried to catch Bumpy from behind during a card game. Another followed him for days, studying routines, looking for weakness. Neither made it home. Harlem had a way of dealing with men who failed powerful people. The streets didn't ask who sent them, they just closed the book. The fifth attempt cut closer than any before. Bumpy felt it, not in his body, but in his instincts. A knife meant for his back brushed past his coat instead, slicing fabric where skin should have been. That night, Bumpy sat alone long after the city quieted, replaying the moment in his mind. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being careless. Sonny Mitchell had crossed a line where mercy stopped being an option. By the sixth attempt, it was clear this wasn't about territory or money anymore. It was obsession. Sonny wanted Bumpy gone, not because it would make him richer, but because it would let him sleep at night. That final attempt was the closest. So close that for a few seconds, death felt like it had weight, like it was leaning in, breathing on him. When it passed, Bumpy knew something important. This war would not end on its own. Anyone in Harlem would have understood what came next. The rules were simple and unforgiving. 6 attempts meant retaliation wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Respect demanded it. Fear depended on it. Letting Sonny live sent the wrong message. Letting Sonny's family suffer wool. He have sent the loudest message of all. In the underworld, blood didn't just pay debts. It closed chapters. That's why revenge would have been easy. Not emotionally easy, but structurally simple. Bumpy had the reach, the men, and the silence to make Sonny Mitchell disappear without a ripple. He could have done it himself, or never been anywhere near it. Either way, the outcome would be the same. Harlem would wake up one morning to whispers that Sonny Mitchell was gone, and by nightfall, those whispers would turn into certainty. And if Bumpy had chosen another route, if he had let Sonny's son die in that alley, no one would have questioned it. No one would have called it cruelty. They would have called it balance. The streets believed in balance. For every attempt on a man's life, something precious was taken in return. That was how order was maintained in a world without laws that worked. Bumpy knew all of this standing in that alley. Every calculation ran through his mind with the cold precision that had kept him alive for decades. Letting David Mitchell die wouldn't just punish Sonny, it would destroy him. A man could recover from losing money, soldiers, or territory. He could not recover from burying his child. That pain would end the war faster than any bullet ever could. And still, there was something hollow about that outcome. Bumpy had built his name on control, not chaos. He believed in rules, even when the world he ruled had none written down. Sonny Mitchell had tried to kill him 6 times, yes, but David Mitchell had tried to kill no one. He was guilty only by blood, and Bumpy understood better than most how dangerous that logic was. Harlem was full of sons paying for their father's sins, growing up angry, violent, and broken because no one had shown them another way. Walking away would have been easy because it required nothing from him. No risk, no effort, no vulnerability. It would have been the expected move, the safe move, the move everyone would nod at and forget by morning. Revenge was simple. Mercy was complicated. That's why the choice mattered. Bumpy Johnson had survived 6 attempts on his life because he understood power. And in that alley, staring at the consequence of another man's hatred, he realized something most gangsters never did. Real power wasn't in ending an enemy, it was in deciding when not to. 10 seconds can feel longer than a lifetime when everything you are stands on what you do next. In that alley, with Harlem holding its breath, Bumpy Johnson felt time stretch in ways no clock could measure. The boy's breathing was ragged now, shallow pulls of air that sounded more like surrender than survival. Blood pooled beneath him, warm against the cold concrete. The streetlight flickered, as if even it wasn't sure it wanted to witness what came next. Bumpy stood there, alone with the weight of his own reputation. A man like him wasn't supposed to hesitate. His name carried an expectation, decisiveness, ruthlessness, finality. People believed Bumpy Johnson didn't wrestle with choices. They believed he gave orders and moved on. But the truth was different. Every decision he had ever made was carved into him, one scar at a time. This one just happened to be visible. He looked down at David Mitchell again. The boy's eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused, searching. There was no recognition there. No fear of Bumpy Johnson and the man his father had warned him about. Just confusion and pain. That mattered more than it should have. Bumpy had faced enemies who stared at him with hatred, who understood exactly who he was and what he represented. This kid saw none of that. To him, Bumpy was just a shape in the dark. In those 10 seconds, every version of Bumpy Johnson argued for control. One voice was company and practical. Walk away. You owe Sonny Mitchell nothing. 6 attempts on your life earned him whatever pain came back his way. The streets will call it justice. The war ends tonight, and you never have to look over your shoulder again. Another voice spoke quieter, but it cut deeper. This kid isn't Sonny. He didn't pull a trigger. He didn't hire anyone. If he dies here, that blood is on your hands whether you touched him or not. Bumpy closed his eyes for half a breath. He had grown up around violence. He understood it. He even respected its honesty. But there was a difference between violence as a tool and violence as neglect. Letting a boy die when you could save him wasn't strategy. It was surrender to the worst part of the world. The boy coughed again, a wet, choking sound that snapped Bumpy back into the moment. Time was gone. 10 seconds were up. Bumpy moved. The decision wasn't loud. There was no speech, no dramatic pause. He bent down, slid one arm under the boy's shoulders, the other beneath his legs, and lifted him. David was lighter than Bumpy expected. Too light. The weight of him felt wrong, like carrying a future that might never arrive. Blood soaked into Bumpy's coat immediately, warm against his chest, staining fabric that cost more than most men made in a month. As Bumpy stepped out of the alley, he scanned the street out of instinct. This was dangerous. Carrying Sonny Mitchell's son through Harlem at 3:30 in the morning made him vulnerable in ways he hadn't been in years. His hands were full. His guard was down. Any enemy watching would have seen opportunity, but none of that mattered now. The choice had been made, and Bumpy didn't second guess once he committed. He moved fast, but controlled. Panic wouldn't help. He kept his breathing steady, feeling the boy's chest rise and fall against his own, counting each breath like it was a promise. His streets blurred past as he headed for the nearest hospital, shoes striking pavement with purpose. A few late-night figures glanced his way and quickly looked elsewhere. Even bleeding and burdened, Bumpy Johnson was not a man you questioned. Somewhere between the alley and the hospital doors, something changed inside him. The anger that had lived in him for years, earned anger, justified anger, began to loosen its grip. Not disappear, but soften. He realized he wasn't just saving a life. He was choosing the kind of man he would be remembered as. Power built on fear faded when the fear moved on. Power built on character lingered. When he reached the hospital, Bumpy didn't announce himself. He didn't demand anything. He carried the boy inside and handed him over, his voice calm, almost gentle, as he told them the child was bleeding out and needed help now. Nurses moved quickly, doctors followed, and in seconds David Mitchell was gone down a corridor under bright lights, leaving Bumpy standing there, hands stained red. That was the moment the weight hit him. Standing alone in that hospital, blood on his coat and silence around him, Bumpy understood what he had done. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed.
No matter what happened next, whether Sonny thanked him or tried to kill him again, Bumpy had acted according to something deeper than survival.
He had chosen honor in a world that mocked it. And for the first time in a long while, Bumpy Johnson felt at peace with a decision that didn't benefit him at all. News in Harlem never traveled in straight lines. It curved through back rooms, slid across bar counters, whispered from stoops to street corners. By the time the sun began to lift over the rooftops that morning, the story had already changed shape. What didn't change was the core of it. Sonny Mitchell's boy was alive, and Bumpy Johnson was the reason why. That single fact moved faster than any threat ever had. The hospital was tense long before Sonny arrived. Nurses spoke in low voices. Orderlies avoided eye contact. Everyone knew whose son was on the operating table, and everyone knew who had carried him in. Harlem's violence rarely entered hospitals so directly, and when it did, it usually came with consequences. People expected shouting, guns, or both. Instead, there was silence, the kind that presses down on your chest. Bumpy waited.
He didn't pace, he didn't sit. He stood near the wall,
coat stiff with drying blood, hands steady at his sides. This wasn't a show. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there because walking away now would cheapen the choice he had already made. Whatever came next, gratitude or another war, he would face it the same way he faced everything else. When Sonny Mitchell finally arrived, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years in one night. His clothes were thrown on in a hurry, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear no street deal could prepare you for. Power meant nothing when your child was bleeding out. Sonny pushed through the hospital doors, ready for confrontation, ready for blame, ready for the world to confirm his worst suspicions. Then he saw Bumpy.
For a moment, the air between them tightened.
This was the man Sonny had tried to kill 6 times, the man he had sworn would never outlive him. Instinct took over. His hand twitched, his body stiffened, his jaw locked. Years of hatred demanded a response. But before words could form, a doctor stepped out and spoke the sentence that changed everything. "Your son is alive." Sonny's legs nearly gave out. Relief hit him so hard it broke through the armor he had worn his entire adult life. He asked who brought the boy in, even though part of him already knew. When the answer was spoken, Sonny looked back at Bumpy as if seeing him for the first time. Not as an enemy, not as a target, as a man. Something inside Sonny collapsed. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a confusion that quickly turned to shame. He understood what had been given to him. Not money, not protection, mercy. The kind that had no obligation to exist. Sonny's voice cracked when he spoke. Tears came without permission, heavy and uncontrollable. He didn't try to hide them. In that moment, he was no longer a gangster. He was a father who had almost lost his son. Bumpy didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He said very little at all. He told Sonny where he found the boy, how close it had been, and that the doctors would take it from here. There was no threat in his voice, no reminder of past attempts, no demand for repayment. That restraint carried more weight than any warning ever could. That was when the war ended, not with a deal, not with a body, with understanding. Sonny knew something had shifted beyond repair, not in his favor, but in his soul. He could never raise a hand against Bumpy Johnson again without becoming something he could not live with. Gratitude tangled with guilt until violence no longer made sense. Outside the hospital, the streets felt it almost immediately. Men who had been watching corners for years relaxed their shoulders. Guns stayed tucked away. Whispers of retaliation died before they could spread. Harlem had seen truces before, but this was different. This one didn't come from fear. It came from respect. People talked about that night in quiet tones, not because they were scared, but because they were trying to understand it. A gangster savvy. His enemy's son didn't fit the stories they were used to telling. It complicated things. It made people question the rules they lived by. And in Harlem, questions had power. Sonny Mitchell disappeared from the war entirely. Not dead, not hiding, just finished. He stayed with his family, kept his head down, and never again made a move against Bumpy Johnson. The man who had once been obsessed with revenge now understood the cost of obsession. His silence became a lesson everyone noticed. For Bumpy, the aftermath wasn't about praise. He didn't seek credit or loyalty. He went back to his life, his routines, his responsibilities. But something subtle had changed. When he walked the streets after that night, people didn't just step aside out of fear. They nodded. They watched him with a different kind of respect, the kind reserved for men who had power and knew when not to use it. That single act had done what years of violence could not. It stabilized a corner of Harlem. It cooled a conflict that had threatened to spill endlessly. It proved that mercy, when chosen freely, could be stronger than intimidation. In saving one life, Bumpy Johnson had saved far more than that. He had shown Harlem a version of itself it rarely got to see, and once seen, it could not be forgotten. Years later, when people spoke about Bumpy Johnson, they rarely started with the bodies or the battles. Those stories existed, and they were brutal, but they weren't where the conversation lingered. Instead, voices lowered and pauses grew longer when they reached the night in 1948. The night Bumpy carried his enemy's son through Harlem. That was the moment that separated reputation from legacy. Anyone could be feared. Very few could be remembered with respect. In a world built on intimidation, Bumpy's choice rewrote how power was understood. Harlem had been taught that strength came from who you coup. LD destroy, how quickly and how publicly. Bumpy proved something different. He showed that real authority came from restraint, the ability to end a war without firing a shot, to win without humiliating an enemy, to act without demanding recognition. That kind of power didn't announce itself. It settled quietly and stayed. The story spread because it challenged people. Mothers told it to their sons as a warning and a lesson. Old men told it in barbershops, shaking their heads trying to make sense of a gangster who chose mercy when violence was easier. Younger men listened closely because the streets were shaping them, and here was proof that the streets didn't have to own every decision. Bumpy Johnson became more than a man in those stories. He became a reference point, a line in the sand. What people remembered most wasn't that Bumpy saved a life, it was whose life he saved. Sonny Mitchell's son represented everything Bumpy was supposed to hate. By choosing to carry that boy, Bumpy rejected the idea that children were extensions of their father's sins. That rejection mattered in Harlem, where too many boys grew up paying for grudges they never started. It planted a seed that maybe, just maybe, cycles could be broken. Bumpy never spoke publicly about that night. He didn't use it to soften his image or claim moral high ground. If asked, he brushed it off with a few words and changed the subject. That silence protected the meaning of what he had done. It wasn't a performance. It was a choice, and choices don't need speeches to be real. Over time, the night became a quiet standard by which Bumpy was judged. When conflicts arose, people wondered what he would do, not what he could do. That distinction mattered. Men who dealt with him knew he was capable of extreme violence, but they also knew he didn't reach for it first. That balance made him unpredictable in the best. It made peace possible. Harlem itself carried the lesson forward. The streets didn't suddenly become kind, but they became more thoughtful. There were moments when a gun stayed in a pocket, when a knife wasn't drawn, when a boy was allowed to walk away because someone remembered the story. Those moments didn't make headlines, but they changed lives. That's how legacies actually work, not in grand gestures, but in quiet echoes. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Bumpy Johnson, a man surrounded by darkness, became proof that honor could survive in it. Not purity, not innocence, honor. The kind that understands the world as it is and still chooses a higher ground when the moment demands it. That's why his name outlived his enemies. Fear fades, stories endure. In the end, the night in 1948 wasn't about Sonny Mitchell or even about David. It was about identity, about who a man is when no one is watching, when the easiest path leads to silence and the harder path leads to responsibility. Bumpy chose responsibility. He chose to be more than the role the streets assigned him. That choice turned a gangster into a legend, not because it erased his sins, but because it defined his limits. Harlem remembered that, and long after the alley was forgotten and the hospital lights went dark, the story remained, reminding anyone who heard it that even in the harshest world, a single act of humanity can change how a man and a city is remembered forever.